All right, well, thanks again for joining us for this live event. My name is Jasmine, and I am the marketing director here at SoftwareMedia.com and Total Cloud IT. And I'm really excited about today's topic with everything going on with COVID-19 and a lot of organizations having their employees work from home. Today, we're really going to be focusing on how to secure those home networks and environments and devices and how we can access resources in the cloud and office kind of while you're working from home in a safe way. And so today our webinar will be covered by John No, who is our technical sales engineer and also Microsoft certified professional. So we're excited to have him presenting. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to you, John, and let's get started.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you everyone for attending this month's exciting webinar. Hopefully it can deliver some value to you all. Before we get started, if this is your first time attending a Teams live webinar, or if you haven't utilized it too much, then real quick, some tips. If you need to leave early, the button is on the top left of the shared screen. The questions tab is the little dark and light chat bubbles on the top right of our presentation. You can see which questions you've asked and which have been published by Jasmine under the featured in my question section. And then lastly, if you want to submit a question, and then we'll go ahead and answer it to the best of our ability. Go ahead and submit the question from the bottom right corner of the presentation. And this looks the same if you're in a browser or if you're in the Teams client itself. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get started. So today's agenda, we'll be discussing how we access resources in Azure's cloud or AWS's cloud. This pretty much transitions. We'll be showing Azure, but whichever cloud you're in, these technologies work for you to enable your remote workers. So we're talking about 3 options today. 2 of them you'll receive a technical demo. The last one is a highlights and architectural discussion. So hopefully there's a lot of good questions and conversation there as we're moving through. So the options you have today are a site-to-site VPN from your office or data center to Azure proper. And today, for the technical demo, we'll be using our Sophos XG firewalls to demonstrate these features. And then the second option you have is a point-to-site. So instead of your users having to VPN to your office and then up into Azure, through your site-to-site VPN, you have the ability to provide a point-to-site connection directly from your devices into the Azure cloud. This is very useful if you don't have existing VPN infrastructure. If you don't have a site-to-site already set up within Azure, it's super quick to set up, very simple, and you can make it as robust as you want it to. So we'll provide a technical demo on that as well. And lastly, we've partnered with Sophos to deliver this third option for you, which is a very exciting option and functionality that you really should consider as an option to you if you're an organization with a remote workforce right now, or if you intend to keep some of your workforce remote, or if you are an organization with a majority of your workforce being remote and you want to be able to secure their data, or if you're in a highly compliant industry, this is a very good option for you. And again, no technical demo on that, but there are very good highlights in an architectural diagram that I hope you'll enjoy. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get started. So we will go through the pros and cons and the use cases of both the site-to-site and the point-to-site VPNs before we dive into the demos. So discussing the site-to-site VPN, Azure works exactly as if you had your own data center. You can create a site-to-site VPN, encrypt your traffic, and pass all of your network traffic through the secure pipe without having to traverse over the public internet. Azure makes it very easy and very intuitive to configure this option. So the pros of this are if you already have firewalls or VPN concentrators, if you've already got big investment into your network infrastructure, you can go ahead and turn this on, and it takes very little investment at all in terms of time and capital to turn on this option. It's super highly available if you've already got a highly available network infrastructure set up. So if you've got highly available firewalls with failover or active-active, your site-to-site VPN will always remain up as long as that solution is healthy. If you've already got your devices connecting to your corporate assets via a point-to-site VPN, Cisco's AnyConnect, Pulse VPN, etc., those will remain functional and be extended into Azure, so people can go ahead and access resources within Azure using their existing technologies and their existing workflows. They don't need to change how they behave at all. So it's a great solution if you've got a remote workforce with corporate assets. One of the downfalls of this solution is that if you've got a personal or BYOD or people working from home and they do not have corporate assets, they do not have access to client access VPN, then those users are unfortunately, unless you are in the position where you can enable them with that client access VPN and are able to afford the cost that takes on their personal hardware, that is a con of this solution. It is also subject to hardware and ISP downtime. If your current infrastructure is not robust enough to survive an ISP being down, or if you do not have the highly available active-active or active-passive firewall, then the solution may be a solution that can subject you to downtime. And it does require, of course, the complex networking hardware that enables this functionality in the first place if you do not already have it. The use cases, though, is if you are an organization who's authorized to work in the office, or who always has who has an always-on VPN for your corporate assets that come back to the office, just setting up the site-to-site VPN up into Azure absolutely helps you extend that functionality without having to invest any additional infrastructure. It does allow you the capability. You may have the capability to run the point-to-site into Azure, but you may have the desire to, or you may be required to run all traffic out towards the internet or towards your corporate resources, cloud included, through your office infrastructure. This allows you to aggregate all of your endpoints out there in the home, in the office, through your existing infrastructure and send it up into the cloud, monitor it, and all of the capabilities that your existing hardware gives you. And of course, it's very fast to enable. We'll talk about real quick the technical capabilities. So Azure VPN, or Azure site-to-site VPN, utilizes IPsec tunnels, and it supports IPv1 and IPv2, as well as if you are an organization that has BGP or Border Gateway Protocol, you can assign the site-to-site or the Azure Virtual Gateway a Border Gateway Autonomous System number, or BGP-ASN, so that you can use that routing protocol, highly redundant and highly available throughout your entire BGP infrastructure, if that's what you're using within all of your sites right now. So before we get into the technical demo on that perspective, we'll go ahead and talk about the point-to-site VPN, its pros, its cons, and the use cases where you may decide to go ahead and take on enabling the point-to-site. So it does require no hardware investments. If you do not have hardware assets at your location that allow you to take advantage of the site-to-site VPN, you can deploy this without having any hardware at all. You can granularly deploy it, in that whomever you give certificates to and you grant certificates to, and this in this demo we'll be showing the certificates-based method of deploying the solution. Whoever you give those certificates to and give the installer to, those are the individuals who are then able to connect to the Azure VNet. And then it works on personal or corporate devices as long as they've got the certificate installed and the Azure VPN installed. They are able to connect. And it can leverage, if you already have an existing public key infrastructure, or PKI, such as Active Directory certificate services. It can leverage that certificate services. You can deploy certificates from there, and Azure can trust those certificates. The benefit of this is that you can really quickly disable it when you're done. Once COVID passes, you are able to say, okay, I no longer want to support a point-to-site infrastructure. You simply go in and revoke the root certificate that you assigned to Azure, and those client certificates that you handed out will no longer be able to authenticate and connect to your Azure environment. There is one of the cons is there is some overhead if you do not have a PKI. There is some overhead to just make sure that you are keeping track of your self-signed certificates. If you have multiple self-signed or multiple self-signed roots, then you may be in a circumstance where you have some trouble keeping track of which certificate went with what VPN. If you've got multiple VNets and you want to enable multiple point-to-site connections for those VNets. It does require local administrative rights when you manually install it. If you're not able to deploy this en masse, then you are going to have to grant those users local admin so that they may click through the prompt to install the Azure VPN. And the install process can be a little bit confusing for some end users simply because your typical daily workflow does not involve installing a client certificate and ensuring connecting to your VPN with the Azure method. But that aside, the use cases for this specific solution is going to be that you've got a remote workforce without an existing point-to-site VPN to the office. If you've already got point-to-site VPNs to your office infrastructure, then very likely that office infrastructure can handle the site-to-site VPN up into Azure. So that may be the route you want to go. The securing cloud resources by enabling just-in-time access is that you are not exposing your Azure VNets to the public internet by way of just assigning a public IP. The only part of your Azure infrastructure is the edge network, which is the Azure VPN concentrator, or the Azure virtual gateway, they call it. So by enabling your users with the point to site, that connection is secure because they only ever turn it on when they need it. And they can only ever turn it on when they've authorized to their computer. And again, lastly, it's very quick to enable and to disable without additional investment in time and infrastructure costs to your organization. So we'll talk about the point-to-site VPN technical capabilities, what protocols and authentication methods it supports. So the point-to-site is fairly robust, just as most point-to-site VPNs are, or client access VPNs, if you're familiar with that name. It can work in the OpenVPN protocol, which is SSL-based, SSTP, IKV2, and IKV2 in combination with the other two protocols. There are 3 methods of authentication supported. We'll show you today the Azure certificate method, but you can enable it by performing by utilizing the certificate method with an existing PKI or self-signed certificate. And Microsoft makes it very easy. There's a doc out there for you to follow. We'll be following that today so you can see exactly the process you'll need to go through. You can also, if you have a network policy server, NPS, installed on your existing Windows server environment, you can extend that NPS into Azure by way of a site-to-site VPN. And connect it to your Azure Active Directory or your on-site Active Directory, and use Radius to authenticate the VPN, so that when they log in, they have to provide their username and their password, and that gets them in. Lastly, you have the option as well. It is a bit more involved, but you have the option to utilize Azure Active Directory as the identity source and the mechanism of authentication. So when a user turns on their Active Directory point-to-site VPN, they simply log in with their corporate credentials to your Azure Active Directory, email address and password, and they're logged into the VPN. So with that said, those are the pros, cons, use cases, and technical capabilities of the Azure point-to-site and site-to-site VPNs. For the technical demos, we'll be following some Microsoft documentation. They're available here. We'll make them available as well after the webinar. But they're very straightforward and very easy to follow. So the first one we will go through is the Azure site-to-site configuration. Just making sure this ran correctly. Okay. So everyone hopefully is familiar with Azure. We'll go ahead and go to one of my subscriptions here, and we'll go to our demo subscription. And we're going to deploy a new resource group here. I do have a working final copy running so that we can play with it at the end of the demo. But for now, we'll create a new resource group called, let's call it May Webinar Demo. and then we'll make this central US. Go ahead and create that, and we'll go right to it since it's pretty instantaneous. And then the next step we will want to do is actually create a virtual network. So we'll go to networking, virtual network, and we will name this May webinar VNet. Oh. And again, we will make this central. Next, we'll want to IP address this. So it's very important that when you're setting up, if you're going to be using a site-to-site VPN, if you're going to be using ExpressRoute, then it is very important that your address space in the cloud is not colliding with your address space in on-site networks. So for example, if your on-site is 10.10.10.0/24, you cannot utilize that same addressing space within Azure. Otherwise, you will get address collisions when you connect your VPN tunnels, and you won't be able to utilize either network. So make sure that you've got your networking networking architecture very robustly designed, and you are very well aware of the address space that you are assigning. So with that said, we'll go ahead and do 172.1.6, and we'll do this as a /20. So, or sorry, yeah, /24. That's just fine. One of the very cool things about Azure is that if you mess up your IP address spaces, it will tell you the next lowest block that you're able to utilize. So here you can see .45 is not a valid network address. We'll use .0 instead. And that's very useful if you're colliding with one of your Azure networks, or if you're just not a subnetting whiz, then you can go ahead and utilize the capability of Azure to tell you where the next best VNet is going to reside. So we'll call this webinar default subnet. And I'm actually going to address this, since I gave this a 24, I'm actually going to address this much smaller at a 22. So 172.168.200.022. Of course, that won't work. I meant a 26, too smaller, not too larger. So you can see here that it tells you if you were to use this subnet, you get 59 usable addresses, and Azure is going to reserve 5 of the addresses in that network space to perform its backend duties. So we've got the IP address space and the subnet defined. Go ahead and click next. We get basic DDoS and firewall, and then we'll just review and create. So the networking takes a very short amount of time to deploy. We can see here now it's completely deployed. And we'll go back to the demo resource group. And it'll take a moment to show up. But while that's working, we will go ahead and deploy the virtual network gateway. So the virtual network gateway is the key ingredient to connecting your Azure VNets together, as well as, if you're not using VNet peering, as well as connecting your sites up into Azure. So we'll go ahead and create it. Again, that's a demo subscription. We will call this May webinar EGW for virtual gateway. We'll also want to make this central. Your network resources must reside within the same region for them to be able to connect. So we'll go ahead and say this is a VPN gateway. It is not an ExpressRoute gateway. ExpressRoute is a topic for another day. And then the VPN type as well. It can be policy driven or it can be route based. For this instance, we'll use route based. Then under SKU, you've got 10 different SKUs here. Microsoft, you can just Google virtual network gateway SKUs in Azure, and Microsoft will come up with a matrix that tells you exactly which of these SKUs may be correct for you. For this instance, we'll use the VPN gateway 1, The difference is that as you go up in the SKUs, you get more throughput, so you can ingest and egress more traffic through your VPN, as well as you also have more you have more point-to-site connections available to you. But the basic and the VPN gateway 1 SKUs come with 100 point-to-site connections by default. We'll go ahead and select generation 1, and then select the May webinar VNet. And then the subnet address range for the gateway must be within your address space, but cannot overlap with your subnets that are in production or that access your resources in Azure. So we'll go ahead and go with the recommended /28 within the 200 here. And then the public IP address, we'll have to assign it a brand new public IP address since we haven't created one yet. So we'll go May webinar virtual gateway public IP, so PIP. And then we're not going to enable active-active or BGP ASN, but here, if you are using BGP, this is where you are going to configure what ASN you want to configure for this virtual gateway. And then if you are looking to enable public or an active-active, a second VPN virtual gateway, or sorry, a second virtual network gateway will be deployed, and you have to assign that a public IP as well. So we'll go ahead and go without those, and we'll review and create. Okay, so that virtual network gateway is going to deploy. Next, we actually have to deploy yet another resource into the same resource group, and that is going to be the local network gateway. And what the local network gateway is the representation of your on-site network, or your on-site gateway, or your on-site firewall, VPN concentrator, whatever you're utilizing right now that is able to connect site to site to Azure. This is the representation within Azure of what that network gateway looks like. So we'll call this Software Media HQ. And the IP address is the public IP address of, here you can see it's the public IP address of the local gateway. So our public IP address here, as discovered, is 50.255 yada yada. And then our address space. So what is the address space on the internal network to that gateway that we're looking to access? So that's going to be 10.254.254.0/24. That's our internal network here. And then again, if you have BGP settings on your local gateway or on the concentrator, on whatever device is going to be doing the site-to-site VPN, you can configure those, the peer IP address and the ASN for your local network here. And then again, we're deploying it into the demo subscription and the new demo resource group. And once again, very important, make sure that the region matches up with your other resources. So we're in Central US. Okay, and those are going to deploy. And here I have the I have the final RG. As these will take some time to deploy, we have existing. You can see that the deployment exists. The deployment succeeded, but there is post-deployment configuration items within the virtual network gateway that it's easier for us to just display a currently working environment. So as we go into the virtual gateway, we can see here, this is the assigned public IP address of that virtual gateway. It's a route-based virtual gateway, and then the the virtual network this one is connected to is the webinar final VNet, which is the pre-built and test resource group that and virtual network that I put together before this webinar was enabled. And again, this is a virtual gateway 1 SKU. We are not running it in active-active, and we do not have a BGP ASN configured for this virtual network gateway. We'll go ahead and take a look at the local network gateway. Here we can see that IP address matches up with what I configured for the one we just deployed. and the IP address or the address space for our local network is the 10.254.254/24. We'll go ahead and go to connections here, and we're going to delete this connection so that we can recreate it, and you all can see how this is configured. It's very straightforward from Azure's perspective, how to configure these connections. Okay, we've successfully deleted the connection. So now what we'll want to do is we want to build the site-to-site VPN, or the representation of it, which opens the endpoint in Azure for your on-site resources to talk to. So we'll go to the virtual gateway, and we're going to go to the connections tab under settings. And oh, we need to delete this side of the link as well. Yes, let's go ahead and delete that. Okay, now we have no connections because they were successfully deleted. So now we're going to create that that site-to-site VPN. So we're going to name this Software Media HQ site-to-site. And here under connection type, we have three options. It can be a VNet to VNet if you're connecting Azure VNets. That's a different discussion. It can be express route, again, another different discussion, but this is a dedicated line for your network to Azure, or we can just build a IPsec tunnel that is a site-to-site VPN. So here you can see that it's selected for us automatically the May webinar final virtual network gateway, and then now we're supposed to select a local network gateway, and again we will select the one that resides within the final resource group. Here we can see that the Software Media HQ one in the demo resource group was successfully deployed. So we'll select that, and then this is shared on a pre-shared this is configured via a pre-shared key. Right now, that is the option you have to use, is to utilize a pre-shared key to authenticate your site-to-site tunnel. So we'll go ahead and generate a password here, and we'll make this a little longer. So we'll copy it, paste the pre-shared key in, and we'll select IPv2. You can see here that the resource group that we're deploying into is the final one, not the one that we are performing with the demo. We can go ahead and click OK, and it's going to create the connection. And as well, I'm going to open a notepad so that we can keep track of this pre-shared key. Okay, so the connection was successfully created. If we click into the connection itself, the virtual network that's it's connecting to is the final VNet. The virtual network gateway itself is the final VGW with the public IP of 1389.47.93, and the local network gateway that we're connecting to is 50.255.193.150. So that's our public IP here at Software Media. And what this enables us now to do is configure this on the Sophos Firewall itself. So we're using Sophos at our location here. We're going to show you how that looks. The general concept is very high level. If you've got your pre-shared key, if you know your remote host, then you're going to be able to configure a site-to-site VPN regardless of which firewall vendor you've got. We just happen to be using and prefer Sophos. So we'll go ahead and log into our Sophos Firewall here. You can see the IP address is our internal gateway, 254.254.1. So under the Sophos XG Firewall admin center here, we can go to VPN. And I'm going to go ahead and delete the existing one and recreate it. So we want to make sure we're setting this up as an IPsec connection because that's the site-to-site VPN that Azure supports, is IPsec. So we'll go ahead and add, and we're going to name this Software Media Azure. Oh, it wants underscores. The IP version is, of course, IPv4, and the gateway type is we're going to initiate the connection from here. You have the option of authenticating with a pre-shared key, a digital certificate, or an RSA key from Sophos. Here in this specific example, we're going to go ahead and use the pre-shared key. So we're going to paste that since I still have it on my clipboard. Actually, just to be super sure, we'll go copy it again and paste it. Now, the listening port is going to be our internal or our WAN facing port here. You can see I'm actually natted behind two other devices. So this example is going to be just up until activation of the tunnel. It won't show the tunnel actually connecting into Azure simply because of our situation at hand right now with this whole COVID business. So gateway address is going to be the public IP address of your Azure Virtual Network Gateway. So we'll go back, and that's going to be the 13.89.47.93. So as we drill down into the public IP itself, we can use Azure's clipboard function and copy that IP address. We will paste that gateway address, and we are not configuring any specific IDs here. But if your firewall requires it, you can simply use the public IP of the remote gateway. Here we need to define the local subnets and the remote subnets that are going to be connected using this VPN tunnel. We're going to use our new network is basically what I've named our 10.254.254.0/24 network here. So we'll apply that, and the remote network is going to be the Azure Webinar Final. And clicking Edit here, you can see, or rather, we actually need to modify this as that is no longer the network that we're connecting to. So we're going to go find our virtual network. Actually, I may be incorrect. I'm thinking we're setting up something new. So let's actually verify that that's this VNet here, the final VNet. And the subnet we're connecting to is, in fact, 172.169.6.20.24. Is this not? Yep, 96 and 24. Yeah, so this is correct. My mistake. So you can see here, this is the network we're going to be utilizing. Click Save here. Add the new item. Select the Azure Webinar Final network. Hit Apply. And then the user authentication mode is none because we're using a pre-shared key. So go ahead and click Save. After clicking Save, the tunnel is created, set up within the firewall. And as we go back to IPsec connections here, we can activate that connection. And again, simply because we're natted behind so many devices at Software Media here, I am unable to complete the connection. But to do so, all you would do is click the red dot under connection, at least if you're using Sophos, and just click try to connect. And this initiates that site-to-site IPsec connection with that pre-shared key to your Azure Virtual Network Gateway, and closes the connection. So that's the site-to-site VPN. Very simple. You just need to deploy a couple of resources of virtual network, the representation of your local network, the public IP for the virtual network gateway, and set up the connection within Azure so Azure knows what kind of connection to expect, and then go to your Sophos or your firewall of choice or your VPN concentrator and set up the other side of that site-to-site VPN with IPsec using that pre-shared key. And if you're not natted behind a dozen devices like I am, you'll be able to connect no problems at all. So that said, that's the site-to-site. Next, we'll dive into the point-to-site VPN. We'll go back to the webinar demo resource group, and here we can see that our webinar VNet and virtual network gateway have finished deploying. So what we need to do is to connect to our virtual network gateway and go to point-to-site configuration here, and you can see here point-to-site is not configured, so we'll hit configure now. This address pool needs to be outside of the address space of your VNet you're trying to connect to, because you cannot use the same address space here, because this is going to be the addressing for the virtual network interface at the clients. So we're going to do 172.16. Let's try a 78.0/24. And again, oh, that turns out to be correct. And here is the tunnel types we can set up. So depending on your requirements, depending on your favor, you can set it up as an OpenVPN, SSTP, IKE, or IKE with the combination of those protocols. For this instance, we'll just leave it at the default open. And here you've got the three authentication types. You've got radius authentication if you've got publicly facing radius, or if your radius server resides in Azure. You can use Azure Active Directory. Again, this is a very involved setup, although there is a very good tutorial on the Microsoft's doc site, or you can use Azure Certificate. We're going to use the certificates today simply for the ease of it. So if I tab over to a few more tabs here, we can see that we can utilize PowerShell to generate those certificates at any device in your organization, and then you simply disperse the client certificates to your end users. So we need to first set up a self-signed root certificate. And to do so, you can copy this PowerShell command. And the only thing that I typically modify when I'm performing this task is that I modify the name of it. So we'll go ahead and clear the screen, and I will zoom in here for everyone's viewing. So where we're going to modify this PowerShell that Microsoft has provided us is under the subject. I want to be able to identify this, so I will name this May Webinar P2S root cert, so point to site root certificate. And it's very important that it is exportable, because we need to be able to export the base64 encoding of the certificate to Azure, so that Azure can say, okay, I trust this root certificate. If you're connecting with a client certificate derived from this root, then I trust you and I allow you to connect. So we'll go ahead and hit enter. And you can see it didn't put anything out because it actually puts the certificate into your personal store, or your user's personal store, and I will show you how to access that in a moment. So keeping the same session open, we'll follow the generate a client certificate steps, which is simply another PowerShell command here. We'll copy that, paste it, and once again, the only thing we will modify here is the subject name. So we will name this May Webinar P2S Child Cert. And Microsoft's already done all the work to put the specific properties into the certificate to enable it to authenticate for you. So simply hit enter. And once again, you can see here the subject, it has been created and it resides within your current user personal store, so the My Store. We'll minimize PowerShell here because we're done with our PowerShell for today. And what we need to open is the MMC, or Microsoft Management Console. I prefer to open it from the Run menu, so just Windows key R, MMC, and then simply go to File and add Snap-in, go to Certificates, and we're going to connect to my user account because that's the that's where these certificates were created and stored to. So hit Finish, hit OK. And as we expand the tree here, we can go to the personal store. It's named My in the in code, but from this perspective, it's called Personal. And we can see here, I've got quite a few point-to-site root certs in here, but the one we just created was the May Webinar root child cert and root cert. So what we'll want to do is we'll right-click the root cert, go under All Tasks and export it. And next, we do not want to export the private key. We simply just want to export the certificate itself. And we're going to export it as a base64. It's very important that you do it as base64, otherwise Azure will not recognize what the certificate is. And I'm going to save it to my desktop and call it May Webinar P2S root cert. Next, and again, it's going to give you the details. We're exporting it as a base64 encoded. Here's where we saved it, and we're not exporting the keys, and we're not including all the certificates simply because it is the root certificate. We'll hit finish. The export was successful, so let's open File Explorer. go to my desktop, sort by type, security certificate. So we've got May webinar, point to site root cert. What we want to do is open that in Notepad or open it in Notepad++. I'm going to open it with Visual Studio Code. And here you can see the base64 encoding of that certificate. So you want to copy the body. Do not copy the begin and end certificate. Just copy the body of the encoding, copy it, and we're going to go back to our point to site configuration in Azure. We're going to name this May webinar P2S or root cert. And we're going to paste. I think I accidentally typed an extra character, so we're going to paste the contents of that certificate, and we're going to hit save. Oh. Let's see what's going on here. Okay, I think that was a false error, so let's try and save. I think what actually was happening is the virtual gateway was actually still deploying in the background without being verbose about it. As you can see, it just said deployment succeeded on the May webinar demo here. So it's now able to save. This will take some time. So I do have a working copy elsewhere. So I'm going to go into my subscriptions. I'm going to go into my production services here. And I've got my Ingress VPN. And here I've got the gateway for ingressing into my public. And I'm going to go to the point to site. And once the certificate is saved and working, you can click the download VPN client. And this client is built on the fly when you click it with the root certificate data. You can have multiple roots if you would like, simply so that you can disable a certain group of users by removing that root certificate. So Azure should respond here, and there we go. So once you've got the installer, we'll go ahead and extract it out of the zip file. We'll go under AMD 64 for the 64-bit. And we're going to run it. For some reason, Microsoft doesn't actually sign this, so we can just hit run anyway. And then you get here the admin prompt I was telling you about in the beginning of the presentation, where a user does need to have administrative privileges to install it. So once you've installed it and click yes to this, I'm not going to do this since I already have this specific one installed. It simply installs it into your settings screen. So here, if I were to go open my notifications drawer and click VPN, it opens my settings VPN page, and we can see here there's a TCIT ingress VNet. Users will simply hit connect. It verifies the child certificate, and now you can see I am connected to this this VNet. So I do need to add some routing rules simply because I have extra security. But you can once you've connected here, you can RDP to your Azure resources without having a public IP address. You can connect to your storage accounts without having to give those public endpoints. It basically enables you to provide access to any resources you've got in Azure without any additional risk to your organization from a security perspective, because it is very surprising the amount of organizations out there that simply have a public IP address on their Azure virtual machines, and they just expose 3389 or RDP out to the public internet. So once you've gone through all the backend work and you've got the client certificate installed on your client's computers or your employees' computers, be it personal or be it corporate owned. If it's corporate owned, it's even easier because you can deploy that client certificate with group policy or with Microsoft 365 Intune. But once that's done, users simply can just go to their notification drawer, hit the VPN screen, be presented with this settings page, and just click connect. And once they've done that, they've got access to your resources in Azure. One of the even better configurations for this is instead of having your users VPN to your site and access resources there. You can have them point to site VPN into Azure, and then have a site-to-site tunnel from Azure down to your on-site offices and allow them access from that mechanism. So you kind of reverse, instead of client access VPN into your organization up into Azure, you go up into Azure first and down to your organization. So however you want to build it, it is very much customizable to your organization's needs. So I'll go ahead and disconnect from this. I don't like leaving VPNs up when I don't have them, when I don't have a need for them. And you can see here in the background, it's still configuring that point-to-site VPN. So that covers the demo for both point-to-site and site-to-site. We'll go back to the presentation and we'll discuss the SD-WAN and site-to-site VPN to Azure from the perspective of utilizing a Sophos XG firewall. I will really quickly add, it is the Sophos XG 86 firewalls. Okay, and so we'll go ahead and go to slideshow and present from the current slide. The Sophos XG firewalls with SD-WAN that we're talking about here is the specific SKU is the XG86 firewall. It is a very small throughput Wi-Fi enabled firewall that you can purchase for less than $400 and install into your customers, into your end user or your contractor or your remote worker, what have you, whatever circumstance you need to protect the remote work location. This Sophos XG firewall enables you to do this with policy and with zero touch and SD-WAN deployment. So you do not need to purchase the firewall, have it sent to you, configure it up, and then send it out to a user. Instead, what you are able to do is, once you've configured one firewall in your organization, and this, of course, it has to be a Sophos firewall. Once you've configured one, you can build an answer key file, and then you can distribute that amongst your users with a thumb drive. So you can buy a 128 kilobyte thumb drive for disbursement with these Sophos firewalls. Your end user, when they receive the Sophos firewall and the USB stick, they wire it up, they plug it into their currently existing network. So it's going to be double natted behind behind their current firewall, or their current usually consumer internet device, an Xfinity X1 hub or whatnot, and they will simply plug it into that, plug it into power, insert the USB stick, and the initial configuration of that firewall is automatic, and it reports into the Sophos Central Firewall Manager that your organization controls. So Sophos has what they call CFM, or Central Firewall Manager. All of the organization's firewalls can roll up into this one management portal, and you can configure policies. You can configure SD-WAN, which is software-defined wide area network. So if you're familiar with wide area network protocols, such as what we just configured, a site-to-site VPN, that's a wide area connection. Instead of having to do that at each firewall, you can define it with a policy that says, if it's a firewall of this SKU coming up online outside of our known networks, then go ahead and apply this WAN profile to it, which allows it to, without having any intervention from the user or from you as IT, to tunnel to the designated peer on that SD-WAN. So for example, you can send out these Sophos XG firewalls, they land on someone's desktop or someone's closet, network closet at home, and as soon as they've plugged it in, got that USB stick in it, it turns on and it connects to your corporate network on the back end. So I think this is very beneficial to talk about the architecture, and to show the architecture as we're discussing here. So in the middle here, let me see if I can get a laser pointer. So in the middle here, we've got the XG enabled bubble inside of the home office. So your home office is typically some third-party gateway, some third-party router with your personal devices, your personal printers, your cell phone at home. If we were to just take the blue work laptop and put it on that network, well, then we're going to try and have to trust this network security and to constrain the capabilities of this laptop, this corporate asset, or if it can be as well a personal asset. What the XG86 allows us to do is you can put the Sophos gateway into the consumer's home, or into the end user's home, and then you have a physical uplink to the existing gateway. But what this allows us to do is that physical link is simply a connection to the internet. The actual traffic will be driven down this policy-driven connection, the SD-WAN connection, to your office network, to your colo, to your data center if you've got it somewhere else. And what this enables you to do is that device that then connects to the wireless or wired network on this XG firewall then is controlled and constrained by the corporate policy that you've got driven through these firewalls. So Sophos firewalls are a lot more than just port open and port closed. They are content management. They are content filtering. They are active intrusion prevention and detection. So you can secure your resources, especially if they're corporate resources, in your users' homes by taking advantage of this architecture. And of course, you can then have the SD-WAN policy-driven connection pass traffic to Azure through your XG firewall at the home to your office network and then up into Azure. Alternatively, you can configure policies from Central Firewall Manager, CFM, to directly enable these XG firewalls to connect directly to your cloud resources. Let's say you don't want to do SD-WAN. Let's say you want to, instead of do SD-WAN, you want to have the ability to set up the site-to-site VPNs. It's more work, it's more manual labor, but you have the ability to create the site-to-site VPN from your XG-enabled bubble at home to your office network or into Azure itself. So very high-level discussion on the capabilities of this mechanism, and hopefully that's very interesting and thought-provoking for you. And that effectively, we just talked through the pros and the cons here. But to really quickly go through it again, it secures corporate assets access at home. It's affordable and scalable. They're very small, cheap devices, especially for a Wi-Fi enabled Sophos firewall. They are zero-touch deployment. You can send these out to your branch sites. You can send these out to your home users. You can send these out to your contractors when they're working for you to say, hey, you are allowed to work for us, but you must work within this bubble, within this constraints. And lastly, it is cloud managed. These firewalls all report up into Sophos Central, and you're able to manage them from there. You can set policies. You can go into the firewall itself and set up its individuals. For example, as I was configuring that VPN tunnel, I didn't have to go to 10.24.24.1. I could have gone to my Sophos Central Firewall Manager and drilled down into that specific firewall and opened its admin pane from anywhere in the world. I don't need to be on the same LAN as long as I've got that Sophos Central Firewall relationship set up, which is what the zero-touch deployment is responsible for doing. The cons, of course, this is an additional investment in infrastructure and hardware, and it is a subscription base as well. So the license that enables those advanced features and those advanced filtering capabilities of Sophos, those are subscription based. They're annual subscriptions. It is additional corporate assets to track and control for. So you need to say, okay, user Sally has this Sophos XG86 rented on this date. She's due to return it on this date. So a little bit of overhead on your organization there. And then any resources in your organization that are sensitive to being accessed by a device that came from a double natted network, they're rare and far in between, but that is something. If you've got technologies that can't survive being natted more than once, that is a private IP translated to public more than once, you're going to have some issues with this solution. But the use cases are tremendous. If you've got a fully remote workforce and you've got a highly compliant organization, you do not have to stop work simply because you can't secure their home office. This allows you to continue to work, continue to enable that user to be productive and to be secure and meet your compliance requirements. It's always on. Well, hopefully always on if your user's home is always on. then it's always on access to your resources in your data center or in your office without additional overhead of configuring that site-to-site VPN. It's not too much extra, but that SD-WAN you can scale. Instead of configuring 100 VPN tunnels individually for 100 devices, you can just set one policy that defines that connection, and they all connect when they come online. So it's great. Again, to reiterate, it's a great solution for enabling a fully remote workforce, especially in the circumstances that we're in today. So that kind of does cover all three of our options. So to reiterate, you've got three options. You've got your direct site-to-site VPN into Azure or into AWS, whatever flavor of cloud you like. You've got your point-to-site VPN. That's super easy to configure, and you can as well integrate it with your Azure Active Directory if you've got your AD Sync Connect and all of that set up as well. We didn't go into that today, but the resources I was showing on that screen, those links take you directly to where to configure the Azure Active Directory capability. And lastly, if you're interested in the Sophos XG Firewall SD-WAN configuration, please give us a call. Call our sales line. Call me. And we will be more than happy to take you through that architecture at a deeper level and discuss if it is the correct solution for you. Thank you again for attending. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to take them before we depart. But with that said, thank you all.